Have you tried Music to Code By yet? Well, why not? Here's a comment Joe left on the website. This is also great music to mow by. I like listening to music while doing yard work to help the monotony of it seem less tedious. This past summer, I started listening to these tracks while doing yard work, and they worked great. I could let the music play in the background without focusing on it, and it seemed to help me concentrate on getting through my tasks. Thanks, Joe. And now you can download the entire 13-track collection. That's over 5.5 hours of music to code by for only $39. Check it out at musictocodeby.net. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Here for another hour of awesomeness. Brian Noyes, our old friend, he's here. We're going to be talking to him about SPA frameworks and all that stuff. But how are you, sir?
I am well. I'm just plunking along here. You know what I got?
What?
We've been working on that little vacation house up on the coast.
I was going to say a cold.
No, I haven't got a cold, but I've got a little gizmo. It's actually, I think it's a Raspberry Pi with a touchscreen mounted on it and a 3D printed case. It's called a tide clock. Oh. And it's actually showing me the tides on the coast near the house at any given time. So it just happens to be when we're recording, it's low tide right now.
Wow. Okay.
And it's over on the West Coast, different from the East Coast. We have a semi-diurnal tide, which means we have a high tide and a low tide, and then sort of a medium high tide, and then a medium low tide.
Is one of those a neap tide, or is that something else?
A neap tide is something else, dude.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know it's an answer in crossword puzzles. That's all I know.
Yeah.
Well, roll the music, Richard, because I have something totally useless for Better Know Framework.
Awesome. All right, dude, what do you got?
It's useless, it's funny, and it's unintentionally a plug for this guy's website, but I don't care. It's just great.
You like it that much?
I do. And this is right up there with the topic today because it is a SPA, but it's a very simple and very effective SPA. Go to 1437.pwop.me or getcoleman.com, Coleman. Go ahead, and I just want to hear your reaction. So what you're looking at is a black screen.
Yep.
Joe Coleman, his name up in the left, very small font, hamburger menu in the right, little bit of text in the middle, but a slider at the bottom.
Right.
On the left, it says less hard sell. On the right, it says more hard sell. And you scroll all the way to the left, it says, so yeah, I'm a freelance copywriter. What of it? And the next one over, if you need a freelance copywriter, you could phone me or not. Right? And then if you need a freelance copywriter, you could try phoning me. It's up to you. And you just keep going, and it keeps getting a few more words, and then some bold words, and then some red headers, and then some stickers, and then all the way to the end, explosions and cats and dogs on skateboards.
Seizure induction. It's the whole screen's flashing. There are dogs on skateboards. This is out of control. Yeah. Okay, I love everything about this.
Not the best website you've ever seen.
Oh, it's awesome.
Oh, congratulations, Joe. That really tickled me.
Oh, it's very funny.
Yeah. All right. Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1278, the one we did with Brian back in April 2016, talking about Cordova versus Xamarin. We seem to be tapping him for comparisons a lot. So we were comparing two different mobile developments. Now we're going to compare different SPA frameworks. This particular comment comes from James Green, who says, another great show. One thing I would like to add to Brian's workflow, and he was talking about, how he actually builds these mobile apps, is the support of the browser as a platform for Cordova. So the same way you can, output to iOS and Android and BlackBerry and Tizen, you can also output to browser.
Yeah.
By adding the browser platform, you're able to run a Cordova emulate browser and eliminate the step of attaching the Safari debugger to the web view. That speeds up the workflow considerably when testing JavaScript changes in a Cordova app.
Yeah.
Nice little piece of insight there. Thanks very much, James. And a .NET Rocks mug is on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We send them out on the skateboard with our dogs. Oh, man.
Speaking of springtime, the dog got a tick.
Uh-oh.
Not a Lyme disease tick, a brown tick. Actually, a tick common to kennels, and interesting enough, he got that tick on his way out of the groomers. So.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's what happens.
The wife found it. We removed it properly. No big deal. But it's like, hey, it's springtime. Welcome to ticks.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to come to Connecticut to get Lyme disease, right? Actually, that's not true, but it started in Lyme, Connecticut, which is about a half an hour from where I live.
Yeah, and Lyme disease is in British Columbia, but it is a particular kind of tick that carries it. I think the bigger issue here is, like, in your part of the world, they just test for Lyme disease and know how to treat it. Here, it's just not well known. And so, if you don't get it treated, it can be quite serious.
Yeah, that's right. Telltale sign are a very microscopic little dot that looks like, it's a tick, but it just looks like a dot. You usually can't see the body.
Yeah, they're very small ticks, the Lyme disease carrying tick.
Yeah, but if you get a round bullseye red rash around it, you better go get something.
Right.
Yeah.
The tick that we pulled off of Zach was like the size of your pinky fingernail. This was a big tick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A friend I know used to say, "I'm full as a tick." All right. Anyway, let's bring on Brian Noyes. He is CTO and co-founder of Salience, also a Pluralsight author, Microsoft regional director, and MVP. Brian specializes in web, mobile, and desktop application development, as well as Azure services for back-end development. Welcome back to the show, Brian.
Thanks. Great to be here again.
And hey, we're all renewed RDs, aren't we? All three of us.
That's right. And that was some feat this time around, because they did some cutting.
Yeah, it was some serious renewal.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely were much more specific and stringent about what the requirements were. So I was glad to pass those gates.
Yeah. Exciting stuff.
So what have you been up to lately in the world of spas?
Still just cranking out apps for customers in the consulting role, sometimes just, guiding them on making their own choices for their team, and a lot of times helping them build it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying, Angular's getting so popular, it's time to switch to something else.
Yeah, right. That's my MO.
I really wish they had used a different name for what is now Angular.
Right.
So, that's one point of clarification for those who haven't tuned in recently, is it's not Angular 2 because Angular 4 just released, and we skipped over 3 just to keep it confusing for reasons to do with what they did when they put out Angular 2. But they want people to call it, when you say Angular, you're referring to 2+, basically. And if you say Angular JS, then you're referring to Angular 1.x.
Yeah, maybe Angular is a word that sort of counteracts tubular, like totally tubular.
No,
it's
totally
either
angular.
Tubular or it's angular. Angular is like a very 80s kind of thing. Everything was angled. Hairstyles, Star Trek Next Generation uniforms,
Yeah, the naming is just it's remember the fun days of when you couldn't call Metro anymore? Right,
yeah.
We still did, didn't we? We don't work for Microsoft.
The platform formerly known as Metro.
But, suddenly Googling solutions for your Windows Store app or your modern app, became incredibly hard because those words are just too freaking general.
Right.
Well, now it's the same thing with Angular, because you do an Angular search and you're going to get thousands of things from the, previous years of Angular 1.x.
Yeah.
And most things haven't quite kept up with the naming, and, they want you to just call it Angular now. It's always going to pick up all the old results. Sure. So it makes things more confusing on tracking down solutions to whatever you may be working on at the time.
Yeah.
It seemed, and it's, why did they skip 3? Was there really a reason?
There was, actually. So they went through a couple of different router designs as they were developing Angular 2. And so they kind of, when they first were starting to be public about Angular 2, they had what they were calling the new router. And they ended up throwing that one away and designing a completely new one, which was the new router, which wasn't a very good name, of course. So they basically version that as version 3 because the one they threw away had been a version 2 number. And since it was a complete rewrite, they used a version 3 on that. And then basically what they've done is they've decided to go with what's called semantic versioning, where anytime you have a breaking change, no matter how small, you bump the major version number. And so that's what drove them to, basically a few of the changes that they put into what's now Angular 4 were breaking in the sense that, your existing code wouldn't work without upgrading some libraries and stuff. And so they didn't want to use 3 because then the router was already 3, so they jumped to 4. Just kind of reminds me of the days of everyone aligning on .NET 4. We did it with Prism. Remember, we had a previous show where we talked about Prism 4, and everyone back then was like, "What happened to 3?" Because we jumped from 2 to 4.
Entity Framework did that too. There was a jump because they just wanted everything to be 4 at that point. It's still
exactly.
Every time I see Google acting like the old Microsoft, I get nervous.
Well, and it's I'm just finishing up a course on Angular and Breeze right now for Pluralsight, and it's been a royal pain for me because I started this a while back, doing it here and there where I can between consulting. And so a lot of the earlier stuff, I was saying Angular 2 on every other phrase. And then once they came out with this announcement, I had to go back and completely re-record the earlier modules to stop saying 2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
It sucks. And isn't Breeze one of Ward Bell's brainstorms?
Yeah. So it comes out of IdeaBlade. It's an open source project, and they do take contributions. But IdeaBlade, Ward Bell and Jay Traband, both co-founders of IdeaBlade, are Jay's really more at the heart of it than Ward in terms of the implementation and everything. But he's actually working with me on a project right now where we're doing Angular and Breeze together, and it's a sweet fit.
Nice
indeed.
And I'm just curious about how Angular and Breeze fit together. What's the division of labor?
Well, it's pretty much the same as it's been since the beginning. The way I think about Breeze, well, especially for your audience, where most people are at least familiar with Entity Framework, the easiest analogy I can give is that the same thing that the DB context is to your back end,
right?
The Breeze entity manager is to your front end in Java, in a JavaScript or TypeScript app. So it just forms this nice repository-like, data access layer, where instead of explicitly making HTTP calls yourself to go get data and push updates and stuff, you just talk to this entity manager and it executes the queries, pulls the data back and caches it, does change tracking on it. So at any point you can just walk up to it and say save changes, just like you do on a DB context.
Nice.
And it knows what to send and what kinds of calls, so it can send down all the changes that have happened since the last time you said save changes.
Right.
I can send them all in a single batch.
But it is pushing a delta. It's not just pushing everything back up.
Correct. Yeah. So it basically just tracks, whenever you create a new entity, anytime you delete or really mark an entity for deletion, because you got to send it to the back end to really get it deleted. And then any property changes on ones that you pulled from the back end, it's just tracking all of that. And you can either just, like a DB context, you can say save changes, it'll do everything, or you can be more fine grained and say, I just want to save this entity that I know changed.
And I see on the Breeze website that they do reference AngularJS. So they specific about support for 1X, or do they have separate support for 2+?
They have separate support for 2+. So what they have is a library called Breeze Bridge Angular with dashes in between. And it does similar. They had a similar one for Angular 1.x, where the two main things it does is kind of substitutes. For one thing, it's making the HTTP calls on your behalf. So, like a DB context does all the low-level SQL talking to SQL Server. the entity manager in Breeze does all the wire level communication for you. So you just go to the entity manager and say, execute this query, and it turns it into an HTTP call. And then when you say save changes, it turns it into an HTTP post.
Nice.
So what their little bridge does is just substitutes. When they originally built Breeze, none of these frameworks were, totally the only one to go with. And so they built it on top of jQuery for the HTTP calls and a separate library called Q.js for promises. But when you're in either Angular 1 or Angular 2 Plus environment, you want to use native promises now with ES 2015 and TypeScript.
Right.
And you want to use the framework's HTTP service instead of jQuery. So their bridge basically just does that substitution under the covers. It's all built with kind of a provider model under the covers so that they can easily do that swap.
I think this is an interesting part of where we are with JavaScript libraries is as the browser continues to evolve and JavaScript keeps getting new functionality, as a library owner, you kind of have to carve pieces off and use the native stuff as it comes available.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's always a moving target, right? Because,
Right.
ES 2015 is almost 2 years old now, and there's still parts of it that some browsers don't support.
Yeah, the browser support itself is an interesting battle, right? And I'm fascinated with this idea that the malcontent these days is Apple, is Safari.
Yep.
Yeah, true.
Yep.
Yeah, how did that
Edge is
happen?
doing a good job of staying up, pretty much equal with Chrome in terms of staying on the leading edge of everything. But the Safari stuff tends to be the stuff that's lagging.
We're pretty impressed with React. Have you guys used that a bit?
I have not carved out time to, other than just trying to understand what it's about and how it changes your app. I've never built anything in Anger with it.
I like the way it's componentized, and nested. It makes for, it's more like the programming that we've been doing for years with starting in VB.
Right.
I mean, it's not drag and drop, but it's as close as we can get to contained components.
Well, and that's one of the things I definitely do like about the Angular 2 Plus design is, in one way, it almost feels like a step backward for someone like me who's been really immersed in UI separation patterns like MVVM and MVC. Angular 1.x was MVC based, but it kind of evolved into a flavor of model view model MVVM in the later releases. And so, that felt completely comfortable to me coming out of a XAML background and lots of MVVM stuff. And Aurelia similarly comes, a strong influence from XAML with Rob Eisenberg at the helm there, and he had built Caliburn, a previous MVVM framework.
Yeah.
So those things all are kind of a natural progression for someone who's been immersed in UI separation patterns. Angular 2 Plus kind of takes a step back in that it's now component oriented. So it's sort of a different, layer of encapsulation. It actually feels an awful lot like web forms controls or even WinForms controls.
Custom
it's
controls,
just
right.
Yeah, it's a component that's made up of both the UI markup and the logic code that supports it. And I can't stop myself from calling it code behind, even though I think that's, frowned on by the cool kids in the Angular community, but that's exactly what it is to anyone who's experienced code behind in ASP.NET or WinForms or even WPF. It's the same basic concept.
Yeah. And that's where we want to be, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different design, but it's still good encapsulation, and there's well-defined patterns that you can follow to have good clean code. And so that's one of the things I'm definitely liking, the combination of ES 2015 or TypeScript and the modularity that it brings in, combined with the component-oriented nature of Angular, or on the Aurelia side, doing it as an MVVM view plus view model.
Yeah.
It's just a much cleaner, structured way to put together a front-end web app than we've really had before.
Structured JavaScript? Are you crazy?
That's what's beautiful about it. It's like you can be very rigid about design patterns and exactly what you expect the code to look like, because the frameworks and the platform support it now.
Are you working in TypeScript as well?
Yeah, so I when I did my Aurelia course, I stuck to ES 2015 because at that point, well, actually, I think when I very first got started with the course was even before the Angular team announced they were switching over to TypeScript, and they were previously working with what they had invented, which was called @script. And so at the time I was like, TypeScript hasn't really taken off, so I'll just stick to the ES 2015 features. And, once Google announced they were going to go ahead and build Angular with TypeScript, it just became a natural. And so the nice thing is if you learn ES 2015, you already know TypeScript. The only real difference is the typing. But all the structuring of your code, all the, identifiers and all the primitives and stuff, the way you define classes, the way you import modules, all that stuff is exactly the same across ES 2015 and TypeScript. When you step into TypeScript, the only difference is now you can put a type on every variable or on return types of methods and stuff and have it kind of enforce that stuff for you. And I do like, coming out of a strongly typed .NET world for many years and C++ before that, I do like having that extra compile time checking and, making it very clear when I'm doing something dumb, trying to, cast something that wasn't intended.
You catch it as early as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This episode of .NET Rocks is made possible in part by Windows on the Google Cloud Platform.
You may not know this, but the Google Cloud Platform supports Windows Server 2008, 2012, and 2016.
It also supports SQL Server versions 2012, 2014, and 2016 standard, web, and enterprise editions with high availability.
You can deploy your ASP.NET Windows apps to Compute Engine or your ASP.NET Core apps to App Engine or Container Engine. That's Google's hosted Kubernetes environment.
.NET and .NET Core libraries are there for all 200 plus Google.com and cloud services in NuGet, led by John Skeet of Stack Overflow fame.
But what about Visual Studio integration? Oh, it's there. You can use Visual Studio to manage your GCP resources and deploy your existing apps.
You get stack driver logging, error reporting, and tracing support for .NET and .NET Core.
PowerShell commandlets for GCP, which run on Windows and Linux.
And a great set of partners to bring your Windows and .NET workloads to GCP, including Capgemini, Neudesic, and Magenic.
So go to gcp.netrocks.com and get your free trial today.
It is interesting to me to think about this new infrastructure with Angular, TypeScript, all these sorts of things is about trying to build some reliability into, what used to be just a little scripting language. Now there's just so much code.
Mm.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I'm working on a couple of projects right now and, it feels, it's the same amount of code you would write if you were writing a WPF desktop application and a lot of the same patterns, just different syntax to the code. But the way we're breaking things out, at a sort of top level shell and then breaking down into components for like a left-hand panel, right-hand panel, and then decomposing from there into, the contents of those panels and all the navigation paradigms, it all flow, you're building a rich client. It's
Sure.
just different code.
Just hosted in the
syntax.
browser.
Yep.
What about testing? Do you have a framework you like to use? What's your approach to making JavaScript testable?
I wish I could answer that better.
Right.
I know I should.
Just don't write bugs. Is that the answer?
Don't write bugs.
Yeah.
He listens to Doug Crockford.
I write flawless code from the start. No. I kind of lean on whatever testing tools the framework I'm working with is using. So these, with both Angular and Aurelia, it tends to be Karma and Protractor for end-to-end tests. And yeah.
How about code generation?
So code generation, I have been using the Angular CLI and the Aurelia CLI, do similar things. I definitely use it to create the basic project. So, especially, and this is one of the things, when it comes right down to a personal preference, if I have free reign to pick the framework, personally, I'm going to pick Aurelia. And we could maybe talk some about why that is.
Yeah.
But a lot of it has to do with, or the strongest aspect that makes me feel that way is that there is just a lot boilerplate code in Angular 2+.
Yeah.
There is, they went with a configuration over convention based approach.
Okay.
So, I really hate to draw this analogy. Someone will kill me for this, but it feels a little bit like WCF in a way.
Oh,
because,
no.
The downside of WCF is you configure the hell out of everything, right?
Yeah.
It kind of feels that way in Angular too.
One would call that flexibility, my friends.
Well, but if there's no good defaults, you can't get going. Is that what you're saying? There's no good default settings?
Well, there are for some things, but I feel like I'm having to express my intent way too much when that intent is always the same.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where Aurelia takes the exact opposite approach. They're heavily convention over configuration based. So, they have well-defined conventions for if you have this method on your view model, it'll be called in this phase of the life cycle.
Yeah.
I came across one of these the other day and compared notes with Ward Bell is part of the Angular team now. He's writing most of the documentation, which is fantastic. He's really good. He's got some really good docs up there and all the samples and stuff. They're doing a really good job, probably because they have Ward on the job. But I was trying to, basically I needed to do something in a component right before it was navigated away from. So it's the current view and you're about to go to another view. And I needed to do some cleanup type stuff. And in Aurelia, that's just can deactivate. You just implement that method and it'll be called. In Angular, you had to go declare an interface and implement an interface from the framework, and then go import that into your module and then tie it into your routing system. And it was just like, oh my God. In the end, it was maybe 20, 30 lines of code I had to write, but it was, the difference of one line of code effectively I would have written in Aurelia. So it's just little things like that I definitely find a preference. Like I said, I've got an inherent bias just being my brain is wired for MVVM, and that's the basic pattern of Aurelia. But I do like the convention over configuration aspect of it. Yeah. I was wary of that at first because one of the distinguishing factors of Caliburn, which was a XAML-based MVVM framework, that was kind of, you could think of it as a competitor for Prism that I've talked about on the show and worked a lot with.
Yeah.
Rob went almost like crazy convention over configuration in Caliburn, where you could have views and view models that had no binding expressions whatsoever in them. There were just controls that had names, and there was code that did stuff, and they were completely decoupled with one another, and they basically automatically got wired up by the framework based on naming conventions. So if you had a save button and there was a save method in your view model, then it would just automatically get wired up for you. And that was like a little too much convention over configuration for my taste. But I feel like in Aurelia, they got it, just right. That those things that are common things, if you want them, you just add a method, basically, or add a property here and there. And there's just nowhere near as much ceremony as there is in Angular.
Yeah, and then, the challenge, of course, is secret behavior, right? Like it does stuff you don't expect it to do, and you're wondering, why is this behaving like this?
Very true. And I mean, that was always one of those counter arguments with WCF as well. It's like, it's hard to keep track of all the things that you can or have to set. But if it's set, you can say definitively what's going to happen. Whereas with the, convention-based stuff, you're guessing a little bit.
Well, I guess part of you understanding the product is understanding these are the conventions. This is what it's going to do unless you explicitly say otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
I also see this sort of an upswing in more opinionated frameworks. It's like, no, our tool is for this. If you're not going this way, don't go here.
Yeah, but there's still, especially in the JavaScript community, there's still a little too much of the shiny new toy everyone should adopt it now and drop everything they've ever done before.
Yeah, that's been a problem for a long time. I mean, it was a problem in our community in the early days of .NET and before. We had that, when the third-party tool market was just getting started and everybody wanted the latest, shiniest stuff.
Oh, I was thrilled. I was always after how many rows of tools can I get? You know,
Right.
I want more tools and more tools. You know, till Visual Studio dropped to its knees.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, we got bit by that,
Yeah.
right? Because we depended on these things that did the work for us without understanding what they did and having the source code and all that.
And if you're an old VB guy, then there was, when they did the 16 to 32-bit move, a whole bunch of controls didn't come across.
Yeah.
Or when they did, they were totally different and broke everything.
Hey, man, ours worked. Crescent Software, we had our stuff together.
Yeah. And then you think about the break with .NET, you know, Developer Express, Telerik, those guys came out of building, you know, starting fresh, building stuff for .NET, and never involved in the old VBX OCX model.
Yeah.
And the original companies, those older companies, they struggled mightily to move forward.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and those same companies are now struggling a lot with this, you know, shift that a lot of people are doing, moving to web front ends like this, because they want to jump in that market and play the same way they did in the .NET market, but that's a market that's used to free and open source.
Yep.
So it makes it a lot harder for them to sell their products in that space than they did with compiled binaries in .NET world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
Must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to express my sense of humor in a 3-word catchphrase.
Awesome.
But I have 3 different possibilities. You tell me what you think.
Okay.
Number 1, confusion over cogitation. 2, stupidity over sanity. And surrealism over sit down and thinkism.
Sit down and thinkism?
Yeah, I think that might be the one. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's time to give away a DXperience subscription to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with Developer Express UI controls and libraries, and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best without limits or compromise. Learn more and download your free 30-day trial at devexpress.com/superhero.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Vishar Gashi.
Congratulations, Vishar.
Yeah.
Golf clap for you, sir.
And Vishar won the DXperience subscription, a big pile of awesome from our friends at DevExpress, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. Every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But you have to sign up to win. All right, Brian, you know the drill. You got $5,000. We're going shopping for technology. What are you going to buy?
For once, I actually thought about this ahead of
nice.
time. Usually I'm like, duh. Yeah. So at the top of my list would be another top end NVIDIA graphics card and 2 more 4K monitors. I've got a nice setup in my office with a standing desk and a treadmill and then a sitting desk. And I've got I upgraded my system last summer and got dual 4K monitors and a NVIDIA 980 Ti, something. And man, when I go to my standing desk, which has my old 1080p monitors on it, just the brightness and the crisp display that I'm now used to with those 4K monitors, I'm just dying to have the same setup for my standing desk. So
you get ruined. What size are your 4Ks?
228s.
So do you scale much? Like, what's the scaling level?
They're just doing their native 3840 by.
But you like to keep your icons decent size? You like 150% or 200%?
Oh, that's scaling. Yeah. I think I'm at 150 or 175.
Yeah.
And I was worried that a lot of different apps would look horrible on there. Most do a really good job that it just looks clean and crisp. There's a few that you end up with some tiny little, buttons and stuff, but.
Because if you got the $5,000, I picked up the 43-inch 4K screen, which you could run at 100%. Then you only need one because it's a giant screen.
Yeah,
that's huge. Yeah,
it's
see
big,
my dilemma there is I've got the whole back wall of my detached office is glass looking out on our yard.
Oh, yeah.
And I like having that, being able to just kind of look up and distance vision and clear my brain kind of thing. So I wouldn't want to totally block it out with that big a monitor.
One of the tricks I've done when I was set up upstairs is I actually took a photo of the view out the window from behind my monitor and made it my wallpaper.
Yep, that's awesome. I've done that before. Yeah.
And if you get it just right, you're sitting in the right place. It's like all you have is the outline of your monitor, and it's like you're just looking through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple more 4Ks and I guess 1080 Ti's are the newest NVIDIA card, and I think
if you want to burn money, there's always the Titan X. That's $1,200.
Yeah, well, when I bought mine, I think it was about $500-$600 for the 980 Ti, and the Titans were like $3,000.
Is the Titan? What is the thing that we say about the Titan? It's the fastest processor in certainly the fastest video processor, but the fastest thing that you can get on that form factor.
Yeah, to fit into a PC. The current generation, the Titan XP, which is again about $1,200, 12.1 teraflops.
Yikes.
Teraflops. This is faster than supercomputers from the 90s. Yeah, right? I mean, the current generation supercomputers are going into the petaflops now, but to get 12 teraflops in a video card, I mean, what are you doing with it except playing Candy Crush, right? But it's a beast of a card. I have some friends who work in astronomy, and they gang these things up to do video processing for identifying asteroids and things. Like the horsepower in these top-end video cards, it's unbelievably performant.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah, so that would give me part way there, and then I think I'd just buy the same monitors for my wife's setup.
There you go. All good stuff. I don't want to go away from the whole open source discussion because I think it's a very interesting time for us with the .NET team going open source as well. It sort of makes you wonder how this economy is going to work out long term. I mean, Microsoft's obviously interested in selling cloud. They've never really, charged all that much for the dev stuff. But the open source community, there's things that are worth paying for. Good support, maintained tools, up to date versions. Like that costs money.
Well, and that seems to be the common model across some of the component vendors. Is they put out either their full tool suite as free open source and then try to garner consulting services around it and tech support type services, or they go with the free and premium kind of model that you get the basic controls, but then if you want the fully fledged do everything controls, then you have to go with a paid model. But talking to a few people who are part of those companies, they're still struggling to make that profitable in the same way that their paid components were.
Well, and I point out the fact that, Rob Eisenberg, the driver of Aurelia, he works for Microsoft now.
Right.
Yep.
On the documentation team, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Last I checked, yeah.
What do you think is going to happen there?
With Aurelia?
Yeah.
Well, the core team is still, Rob was leading the charge. Part of his agreement hiring on with Microsoft is that he could continue to work on Aurelia. So it's, the question always comes up when I give talks on it and stuff. So is Microsoft going to, take over Aurelia? And I think the answer there is definitely not.
Right.
But I think the benefit that Aurelia gets out of it is they've got obviously a strong advocate. So, things like there's an effort that the ASP.NET Core team has done called JavaScript Services, which lets you code generate a project that you can either do command line or Visual Studio with an ASP.NET Core basis, but then use Angular, React, Aurelia as your front end framework, within that project structure, which is a huge thing because the biggest challenge for people adopting Angular 2 Plus or Aurelia has nothing to do with the framework. It has everything to do with this new world of compiled front end, TypeScript, JavaScript, that you are building these modules and there's module loaders and there's all this different infrastructure that you need. It's not just flat files being loaded into the browser anymore.
Yeah.
So getting the right build environment, build, deploy, and test environment put together as a non-trivial task, and there's many different paths to success, which just kind of adds to the confusion factor. So these JavaScript Services projects are nice for the tried and true Visual Studio person who doesn't want to leave the warm confines of Visual Studio. There's now a good path there for Angular 2 and Aurelia. And so I think, having Rob kind of in the house there to advocate to always try to keep Aurelia on a, semi-equal par with Angular is a good thing for the framework.
And we did a show back in November of 2016 with Steve Sanderson talking about JavaScript Services when it was brand new.
Yeah, that was actually how I heard about it at first. I was, working on getting started with some Angular 2 stuff at that point, and I was like, yes, there's a path.
That's a really good idea. But you know what? That's Steve Sanderson, man. That guy is thinking about our next problem as web developers every day.
Yep.
Sure absolutely. I mean, it was his knockout that got me into the whole SPA world in the beginning.
Yeah, no kidding. And a lot of people, in a lot of ways, he just started defining SPA as a manageable approach with Knockout. Do you still use Knockout? Like, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's just not as cool and sexy as the later stuff.
Yeah, I haven't touched it in a long time. I know, Miguel Castro, I was giving him crap for a long time because he continued giving Knockout talks at conferences. But, a lot of people would show up, and the fact is, Knockout is supporting probably the biggest SPA in the world today.
Yeah.
Which is the Azure portal.
Right.
Yeah. Which you've had people on the show talk about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's great. I resisted it for a while because it was new and everything, but now I'm finding that there's nothing I can't do on it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just in time for the old one to be shut down.
Nice.
Yeah, at the time that I was using Knockout, it was purely a data binding library, which was a perfect kind of gateway drug, if you will, for me to bring me into the SPA side, because I've always been heavily focused on data binding in Windows Forms and WPF and XAML in general. And so it made the whole approach of building your whole front end in JavaScript palatable to me to go, oh, I could do data binding just like I did in my rich clients. Let me check that out.
Yep.
But I know, with all the stuff they did with the Azure portal and stuff they added, it became more of a SPA framework than just a data binding library. But I had already kind of moved on to Angular 1.x at that point.
Yeah. And you said quite bluntly here that if you have a choice, you'll use Aurelia. But what's the argument? Is it just a preference thing, or is it faster to develop in? Like, what's the real strength?
It's more a preference thing, to be honest. The only work I've done with it is developing my course, building samples, and presenting on it. I haven't built a production app on it, whereas I am building a couple of production apps with Angular 2 right now. And, even given that and, more real world work on it, I would still drop Angular 2 personally and go to Aurelia for some of the reasons mentioned. I find that Aurelia has the convention-based approach is a much cleaner balance to me. I just find I write less code to do the same thing in Aurelia.
I really do want you to try React, though, and let me know what you think.
Yeah, it's funny. Ward and I have had conversations about this. I think I somewhat resist just because there's, certain members of the JavaScript community that have been on different podcasts and stuff. And that seems to be the shiniest new toy that they want to discard all things that came before and everything should be React now. So I think that kind of...
I don't think that is warranted unless there's a reason. But my experience has been there's just a lot less code and it's a lot more componentized and talk about convention over configuration. It's really nice. It's pretty elegant. Yeah, true. You kind of are a fan of elegant code, so I'm thinking you'll
definitely
like
it. Yeah, I'll have to carve some time out for that eventually. Yeah. But yeah, so at a technical level, in fact, I did a comparison article that we could post a link to on the Pluralsight blog. And at a technical level, they're just different. You can't say either one is technically superior to the other. They're, equally capable. There are certain things in Angular 2 where you'll have to write a bit more code than you would in Aurelia.
Yeah.
They're different from the design pattern perspective that Angular is component oriented and Aurelia is MVVM, UI separation pattern based.
Yeah.
So the structure of each individual view that you write is a little different. If you've had zero exposure to MVVM or MVC, then probably Angular is going to resonate more.
Yeah.
So it makes it very hard. And so the one, what's the killer reason that someone goes with one over the other is what I've been finding with the customers I've been dealing with. It's just simply the size of the audience of Angular wins every time.
Yeah.
And they're not willing to adopt Aurelia because they're afraid of the smaller audience means, less resources in terms of hiring people, less documentation, less samples,
right,
and so on.
Sure.
So they go with the big gorilla and expect that the ecosystem will support them better, which is not a bad argument. It's
not a bad argument at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how we are naturally pushing towards, we complain when we have a monopoly, so to speak, or when there's one approach dominating. And at the same time, we always push for it because we want that size of community, that range of options, like that those things all kind of go together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's plenty of decisions to be made in your own app and how to satisfy your own requirements. Having to thrash up front, trying to decide what framework to even use is just too hard.
Yeah. An unnecessary battery of work, but it is an interesting schism that we deal with to be able to do both those things.
I mean, the Aurelia audience is not tiny by any imagination. They've got a huge audience on their Gitter channel. There do seem to be a lot of people adopting it. So, I think it's going to stay in there as a contender. Will it ever overtake Angular? Personally, I'd love it if it did, but I doubt it because we talked about naming before, and from a getting things done perspective, I wish they would have named Angular 2+ something else, so that we didn't have all the confusion there.
Yeah.
But from a driving their audience forward to their new version, it totally makes sense because it just makes it sort of a no-brainer thing. If you were an Angular 1.x guy, the normal conclusion would be I should become an Angular 2+ guy.
Well, at least Angular 2+ has only 5 syllables. Microsoft. Microsoft.
Indeed.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, what's next for you, dude?
Oh, I'm just I'm always trying to find more time for Azure stuff. My colleagues Michelle and Zoiner at Soliance are just crazy smart on all things Azure, and I don't know how and AWS for that matter. I don't know how they fit all that stuff in their heads, but client stuff seems to fill up a lot of my time that they don't bother with.
Are most of your customers using Azure for their websites, or is it still a lot of on-prem?
Still some on-prem, but definitely we specialize in cloud stuff and Azure in particular. So, we've got a lot of customers that we're helping migrate to Azure from on-prem solutions. We've got Michelle especially works with AWS, and she's got a number of customers she's working with there. So we try to be somewhat nonpartisan about the cloud, but we all came out of Microsoft backgrounds, and I think all three of us, I can't speak for them, but
right.
I think Azure is a superior platform in terms of the range of choices and the number of platform as a service, especially options that you have to compose a really elegant architecture for even very complex high scale solutions. And I think that's one place that Microsoft's beating Amazon, and definitely the Google services are up and coming and trying to compete, but at this point, it's the mind share is mostly on AWS and Azure.
Well, Brian, thanks very much for talking to us. It's always great to catch up with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right. And we'll see you down in Orlando at the end of May.
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. We'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes,